So we talked about how the best web applications handle the smartness of a website, right? They handle this sort of stuff. So we did some basic contact form stuff. Granted, we didn't do anything with that data, but the point of that was really to show you how the form works, not so much of the aftermath of that. Down the line, we'll definitely make this into something real, but for now, that covers the things that we need to know. That is, designing the form, not only designing it in terms of what it needs, like a char field or email field, but also even adding in our own widgets and our classes to make it look better, right? So we not only designed the back-end portion, but also the front end, so how it's going to be displayed. And then we talked about briefly on how it actually handles this data. So what we want to do here is do that same concept, but actually log a user in. So log into the actual service. So to do this, there is going to be a few things that we're going to do. And the number one thing is we're going to define a login page. So we'll just call it login page. And it's going to take in a request just like everything else. And it's going to return render, request, some template, and some context, right? So I'm going to call this auth and login.html. That's going to be the template that I still have to make. And while we're doing this, I might as well use this same sort of function for register. I'm not going to do register yet, but we might as well just set it up. Okay, so before I even jump into making the template, because we kind of already have an idea of how to make the templates, I'm going to make the login page form. So back in forms.py, I'm going to come underneath the contact form and say class login form. So this takes form.form as the instance again. So, or the parent class is forms.form. And we're going to say username equals to forms.charfield and password equals to forms.charfield as well. Cool. So now that we've got this, let's go ahead and import it into our view. And we'll go back into the login form. So we want to create an instance of that form by doing form equals to that form. Again, I'm kind of diverting from this naming convention to go with the actual convention, which you'd call it form or form class. So form equals to the instance of the login form. And again, request.post or none. And then we'll say if form.is valid, we'll just print out the form.cleaned data. Okay. And we could essentially do the same thing for register. So I could actually just copy all this stuff over and paste that in as well. So now that we've got the form and all this data, let's go ahead and create login.html. And of course I put it in the folder auth. So let's go ahead and make that first auth and then new file login.html. In this case, I'm actually not going to copy everything from view.html. Instead, I'm literally just going to have the form. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this portion and just put the form in there. Okay. This is going to help us just be very focused on what it is that we're doing here. The next thing is I want to actually show whether or not the user is authenticated. So I'm going to come in here and I want to pass in as a view in my context. I'm just going to go ahead and print out request.user.isAuthenticated. Now, this is built into Django, so you don't actually have to worry about that yourself. So if we save it and go back into contact, that's actually not the page we want. We want to wrap in our login page, right? So we've created the view, we've created the form, we've created the template. Now we're ready to actually put it into a URL. So let's go into urls.py and import the login page. And I'll just copy the contact page, put it underneath that, and we'll do the login page. Notice I didn't call it login. There's a reason I didn't call it just define login. And there's also a reason that I haven't called it login view yet. We'll talk about that later, but it's specifically login page for a very, very specific purpose. So we save that, we save everything. Let's go to our login URL. And we've got this no such table Django session. So something you may have noticed is every time I do run server, I see this, Well, that's because I actually haven't set up my database stuff yet. So all I need to do is python manage.py migrate and python manage.py create super user. So this is the user that is going to handle the backend. It's going to actually do some admin things. These are admin privileges. Now I'm going to use the username CFE. I'm not going to put in an email right now, and then I'll just write a whatever password. When you're learning, the passwords don't matter. And we're learning, so the password doesn't matter. And it really doesn't matter because I can run python manage.py, create super user again, and make a new one. So even if I put in a secure password here, that part doesn't fully matter. It only matters when you go live and you have to add in other security features. That's really when it matters. Okay, so now I've got my super user, and I've also have the database all set up. In future videos, we'll actually talk about this stuff, but for now, I'm just going to go ahead and run the server and refresh in here and go ahead and look at my terminal. It says false. Why does it say false again? If we go into our views, I actually print it out if the request user is authenticated. So I'll just say user logged in, just so we can see. It says user logged in is false. Cool. So the next thing is I have to add the form to the context. So again, I'll create that context dictionary, and we'll just say form is equal to that form. So the template context is equal to the function variable. Okay. We refresh in here. That looks like we have to also put it here, and we refresh, and there's our username and password. And of course, the user is actually not logged in. So what we learned in the last one is I can actually print out that clean data, right? So that's what this is going to do. So I'll just say username, CFE, password, learn code. Okay. I hit submit, and well, there we go. We've got our username and password. Here's the problem. The password is showing up. So if we look in our widgets, let's go ahead and do password. And what we see here is password input. We don't want the password to show up. You want it to use a password type. So you want it to actually be hidden from the viewer. That's a security measure that most websites have, if not all websites have, when you log in. So we'll just say widget equals to forms.password input. Okay. And we refresh in here, CFE, learn code. Notice that it's no longer showing up. Perfect. So it's actually getting that data. All right. So let's go back to the view and actually log this user in. So let's make this part actually work. There's a couple things that I want to do. Number one, I'm going to move this context dictionary and redefine it. So I'm going to put it right here. Okay. So I'm just putting it right after I do the instance. And this, for this reason, I say context then, and form, since it's a dictionary, this is what I can do. We just do a new instance of that login form. So that actually clears out the form for us. So if I do CFE, learn code, hit submit, it clears it out. Now I have auto password filling in on that particular URL. So if I open up an incognito window, it actually clears it out. I'll just keep that open for now. Okay, so an incognito window, of course, file new incognito window. That just clears out the session and doesn't autofill things like that. So we don't have the user logged in. So now I need to log it in. I'm still getting the same data, right? I'm getting the username, I'm getting the password, but now I actually have to do some authentication. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the documentation to see how to do it. It's right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to import it at the very top. Okay, so we've got authenticate and login. Now, see how this is called login? That's a function. This is also a function. That's why you need to call it two different names. And going along with their actual data, notice they have this request post, very similar to what we've already seen, but we want to make sure that the data is being validated. So we don't want to go off of theirs, but instead we still could use these things, right? So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and just paste it into the form valid method. Paste it in here, and I'm going to change this context to being this invalid error, or sorry, not invalid, but valid error. So if it's actually logging in, we'll explain that in a second. Otherwise, I'm just going to print out error. Okay, so how do we get the authenticate to work? So we've got username and password. Now, if you remember back to this printed out clean data, we can scroll up and actually look at it. We see that it's just a dictionary. So with that, we can just say username equals to form.cleandata.get username. And we can do that same thing for password. Okay, password all the way through. And this handles the authenticate for us. It's going to make sure that that username and password are real, and it's going to set it to a user. Once it's a user, it'll log it in. And then it will actually do the context all over again. What I'm actually going to do is instead of render, I'll do something or import something called redirect. And if the user is logged in, I'll just return redirect to login. So I'm just going to have it go right back to the login page after they actually log in. So let's go ahead and try this out. I'm going to add this request user is authenticated right here. And I'm also going to add it right there. All right, so we're going to see users logged in, likely false, and then we'll see what these next two are. It'll be true or false, and then so on. All right, back into our page. Let's go back into the incognito window here. And I want to make sure my server is running. I got an invalid syntax somewhere on here. Oh, this login page. I think when I was showing that, I might have selected it and deleted it on accident. Okay, so there, it's back. Now we're going to look at the terminal. We see user logged in is false. I'm going to go ahead and type in my username and my password. I'll hit submit. Well, it cleared everything out. Let's look at our terminal. And now we see user logged in, false, false, false. And then user is logged in, true. So each step of the way, this user is not logged in before the form is sent. The user is not logged in after we actually authenticate the user. And then the user is not logged in even if the user is not none. Well, these are basically the same. It only authenticates after you call this login. So you're actually attaching this user. So this is actually the user itself. So if I print out user, I should see my user. I'm going to comment these things out because I don't need them. I'm going to print only the user. So I'll do CFE, learn code, hit submit, terminal. We see that it says CFE here, right? So it says user logged in, all the data, and then user. That's the actual user. That stuff we'll talk about much later, but the main part of this is actually, this is now a logged in user. And since it's my super user, if I go to the admin or the Django admin, I can actually log in here too. I know we haven't covered this stuff yet, but you absolutely can start doing things such as even creating new users, and those same new users could log in here. So that is it for the login page. The register page is not a whole lot different, except we're going to have to validate probably a few more things. One thing I will mention right off the bat is, hey, if I do ABC or some other user, it doesn't actually show me the error, right? It does say error, right? So like looking here, it does say error, but it actually doesn't do the validations for us. That's starting to get a little bit more advanced, but for us, we are now able to actually log in to any given page on our project. If you have any questions on what we did here, please let us know. Otherwise, let's continue to the register page.